Bonjour et bienvenue à tous. My name is Constance Mardrus, speaking from New York, and I'm the Director of Programs and Events at American Friends of the Louvre. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the Making of the Louvre Museum, part of Russell Kelly's new series, The Making of the Great Museum of Paris, and featuring guest speaker Françoise Mardrus, Director of Museum Studies and Research Support Department at the Louvre. Before we get started, a reminder that we are using a Zoom webinar format. This means you can only see the guest speakers. But no worries, you can use the chat line to communicate with all participants. Give it a try and tell us where you are listening from. We also ask you to use the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen to ask questions. They will be answered by your guests at the end of the talks. Please note, we will also send you a recording a few days after each talk series once it's approved by the museum. This program is presented in partnership with the Alliance Française de Chicago and the Alliance Française Miami Metro, with communication support from the American Friends of the Louvre, the American Friends of Versailles, the Friends of the Domaine de Chantilly, the French Heritage Society, and the Fédération of Alliance Française USA. American Friends of the Louvre is a non-profit established to strengthen the ties between the Louvre and the American public and to formalize the long-standing generosity of American patrons. Through its support, AFL raises awareness of the Louvre collections and museum expertise and helps make the museum exhibitions and permanent collection more accessible to its ever-growing public. To date, AFL has made commitments of over 55 million to the Louvre, and its importance as a financial resource for the museum is increasing each year. You can find more information about all of that and our initiatives on our website, or you can contact me if you are interested in supporting our mission. All the information are on the chat line. And now, please welcome Russell.
Thank you very much, Constance. And welcome to all, and greetings from Palm Beach. It's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker, Françoise Mardrus, who, as Constance says, is the Director of Museum Studies at the Louvre, and she's also in charge of the Dominique Vivant-Denon Research Center at the Louvre Museum, which is named after the first director of the Louvre, Dominique Vivant-Denon. Françoise studied art history first at the Sorbonne, and then at the prestigious École du Louvre, and then earned her degree in curatorial studies at the equally prestigious École nationale du patrimoine, the National School of Heritage, right next door to the Louvre. Since finishing her studies, Françoise has spent her entire professional career at the Louvre, starting as a special advisor on the Grand Louvre project, with its famous pyramid designed by the Chinese-American architect I.M. Pei, and then working on special projects, including creating the Louvre's new Denon Research Center, which she now directs. Françoise, in addition to all of that, co-edited with her colleague Guillaume Foncanel the definitive work on the Louvre Palace and the Louvre Museum, a 3-volume boxed set that was published in 2016, is 2,500 pages long and weighs 12 pounds, which I can attest to since I tried to carry it back from the Louvre to our apartment, and I had to take a taxi. It was too heavy. She has taught courses about the history of museums and about the history of the Louvre Museum in particular to students at all levels at the École du Louvre. So there is perhaps no one better qualified than Françoise Mardrus to tell us the story of the making of the Louvre Museum. Her challenge will be to condense 1 year's worth of lectures into 1 hour. À vous, Françoise.
Thank you very much, dear Russell. It's a great honor for me to be invited by the Alliance Française of Chicago and the Alliance Française of Miami. I am very pleased to explain to you the making of the Louvre Museum. Thank you to Constance Mardrus to organize a communication about the American Friends of the Louvre and to permit me, of course, to join you equally with Russell Kelly. Thank you very much, Russell, for that. Now I share my screen. It's okay. Well, the making of the Louvre, it's a great story, of course. And I would like to invite you to follow me for this travel from several centuries till today, because I think it's very interesting for you to know more about the history of the museum, not as really as Guillaume Fontenelle has done it, because it was really a specialist about architecture of the museum and the urban plan of the museum in Paris. But myself, because I am on a curatorial position with heritage, meaning I would like to develop, of course, the development of the museum inside the palace. And I think I show you around through some focus, of course, I can propose to you, I show you the development of this museum. My synthesis, of course, is divided into 3 parts, because I would like to be clear, because as you know, the museum is so huge, of course. Maybe I can say that it's roughly 3 tube station, of course, inside 4 tube station inside Paris, I think, from the Place de la Concorde till the Place Saint-Germain-l'Auxerrois. It's so huge at the heart of Paris that it's very important to know really the development of it. 3 parts, birth of a museum, of course, from palace to the development of the museum. Maybe I think I have focused on 19th century, because it's really the development of the great growth and expansion of the museums. The museums of the Louvre, of course, and you'll see why I notice that. And thirdly, the Republican Museum in question, because of course till today there is a great questioning about the universal purpose of the museum. And maybe till today, it's a great question we could have on the conclusion of my lecture. From palace to museum, of course, as you know, and I passed very quickly about that, but it's very important to notice that at the end of the 12th century, it was at the beginning a fortress to protect Paris. And you see on an old map of the Paris, Middle Ages Paris, of course. You have, of course, the idea that the beginning of the castle is really to be defensive and against enemies coming from the western part of Paris, of the capital. And maybe through great excavation at the end of the 20th century, we have rediscovered the place of the fortress, and you have the substructure of this fortress, which were seen today and which are on view today in a percourse dedicated to that. Secondly, from Middle Ages, the end of the 12th century till the 17th century, a huge gap. You have the great definition of the building that you know today, the great space dedicated to the Palace of the Louvre in the heart of Paris. And it's very important because you know that at the end of the 17th century, there is a great rupture, the first one, because it's a decision of the King of France, Louis XIV, to leave Paris and to create a new capital, a new city in Versailles. And of course, it's a great rupture in the confrontation between the city and the power, state power. And of course, in 1692, because the castle, the palace becomes very free, because the king was installed, was set in Versailles, with its collections, with its power, with its governance. Of course, the palace is totally empty, and in 1692, there is the arrival of the Academy of Painting and Sculptures and the artist, main artist, because in 1649, it's the creation of the Academy of Painting and Sculpture, and several years after, they are installed, they are set into the Palace of the Louvre. It's a new area for the museum because it's become, for the palace, sorry, because it's becoming the Palace of the Arts and the Artist, with the creation in 1699 of the Salon of the Academy. And you see, of course, the first engraving giving the idea of the development of the display of the artistic production of the artist of the Academy in the Grande Galerie, the Great Gallery of the Louvre. It's a first exhibition, public exhibition in the museum, 1 month every year, in August. It's a public exhibition, the first one. And of course, the Salon decided for several centuries and several years of the occupation of the palace by the artist. And it's a new story, and I would like to develop, of course, this idea till the birth of the museums, because it's roughly at the end of the 18th century, maybe in 1774, when Louis XVI went on the throne, and he has a project of a museum of its collection. Why? Because there is a debate. There is a debate inside the museum because the great masterpieces coming from the king's collections, from François I, during the Renaissance period, is very away from the Louvre. They were displayed in Versailles, and the artist didn't go to Versailles to copy them. And they need that those collections could be bring into the Louvre. There is a great debate about that. But some explanation about the birth of the royal collections. It's very important. François I, during Renaissance period, is the first very important monarch, king of France, which decided to create collections and to support arts at its court, because he has really struggled, as you know, against the Pope, against equally Charles V of the Habsburg family, and he has seen in Italy when he struggled. He has seen the great collections of the Italian princes, and in Milano, equally in Firenze, in Florence, of course, with the Medici family, and is very inspired by that. And when there is a peace, after he's done in jail by Charles V in Madrid, he comes back in France, and he decides to do the peace with the Pope, with Roma. And he invites a lot of artists, as you know, as Leonardo da Vinci in France. And of course, at the death of Leonardo da Vinci, the Mona Lisa stay in France, of course. And it's the reason why we have today in our collection. But equally, you have Raffaello, and Raphael with a great family, which comes from François I collections. Then the next important step was during Louis XIV's century, because he has totally refurbished Versailles and created a new luxurious palace, as you know, because he would like to have a great inspiration about all European courts at that time. And of course, all those princes are very jealous from the absolutism court and great artistic development of Louis XIV's powerful power mainly in Versailles, in the garden and in the palace, but not at the Louvre, not too much at the Louvre. But his prime minister, Colbert, decided to develop and to acquire a lot of works of art, from great masterpieces to rival, to be mirrored with the pop collections in Roma, with the great princes, Charles I in England, for instance, and the Medici family, for instance, or the Habsburg in Madrid with Philip II in the Escorial, which was a very beautiful collections of great masters as Tiziano, etc. And Louis XIV acquired at that time Tiziano, Caravaggio, Raffaello, as you see. And it's very important and impressive because not at all painting, not only painting, but as well sculpture, antique sculptures. And you see the Venus coming from Arles, in the city in the south of France. It's the citizens of Arles who have decided to give to the King of France for his garden in Versailles this Venus, which is very well known today at the Louvre. But on the other side, he has developed an exquisite and beautiful collections of drawings. He has acquired all over Europe in different schools, Flemish, Italian, Northern schools, French school as well. And he has purchased from all great collections because the art market at that time became very developed. And it's the same thing for jewelry or very fine arts, decorative arts with antiques parts, camé, etc. Well, it's a very impressive collection. We noticed that there is 480 paintings at the end of the 17th century in the collections of Louis XIV. But next step with Louis XVI, because during Louis XV, which is very well known because Louis XV, the Bien-Aimé, has a very good collections, but as you know, with the Marquess of Pompadour, for instance, he has decided to have a very exquisite style, taste, and he acquired a lot of masterpieces for its collections. But the decision to regroup the Kings of France collections in a unique place, and maybe at the Louvre, it's under Louis XVI, just before the Revolution, of course. And it's the Count d'Angivillers, the director of the King's Building of Louis XVI, who decide to develop a project in the Great Gallery, in the Grand Gallery of the Louvre, 420 meters long. And it's very interesting to have this official portrait of the Count d'Angivillers, because in an official portrait, it's very frontal, it's a very official one, political one as well. And the idea is that for the first time you have in the red circle, I have noticed the plan of the Great Gallery under his hand. It's very interesting to notice that because it's an official portrait and it focuses on the idea that the King of France was delegate to d'Angivillers the creation of a museum at the Louvre. It's very important to notice that. And at the same time, d'Angivillers would like to reconnect with Colbert under Louis XIV to enlarge the collections. And he purchased the Northern School and maybe the masterpiece with Van Dyck, Charles I's portrait, entire portrait, of course, very important because it's come from the collection of the Comtesse du Barry, the favorite of Louis XV, and it's a very exquisite, of course, portrait, very large one and monumental one, as well as the Rubens, great masterpiece coming from church in the Flemish countries. And of course, it's a very important collections of Northern School Baroque taste against classical taste, which is very famous and noticeable in France, as well as to purchase an enlarged French school, of course. I don't leave you the name of this, but it's really important because it's a series of decorative paintings, which is with the muse and artistic part of this iconography, and it's very interesting, very seducible, tastable, of course. And on the other side, you have The Young Beggar by Murillo, the Spanish painter. And of course, it's very important to notice that Dangevillers would like to develop a Spanish school at the royal collections. And maybe the place to display these beautiful collections. Because I have noticed, and I have said formally, that the artist who copies and who work at the Louvre, who exhibit at the Louvre with the Salon, they would like to bring back to the Louvre more and more masterpieces coming from Versailles, cancelled in Versailles, from the collections of the King of France. And it's Dangevillers who took the decision to develop a project, architectural one, in the Grande Galerie. And you see on this map of the 18th century, mid-18th century, you see in my red circle the definition of the long corridor of the Great Gallery. 400 meters long, of course, but it's very interesting because it links the Louvre Palace and the Palace of the Tuileries. And at the heart of Paris, you have the definition of a great design, architectural one, for the Palace of the King of France. And inside, you notice that there is a main place dedicated to the collections of the King of France. It's really the museum's project, which is on the way to go on. And I show you two documents because they are very unique. A drawing with a salon, which is equally a space dedicated to the exhibition of the academy called Artist. Each year, in August, they exhibit 1 month their works of art, maybe paintings, mainly paintings, but also sculptures at some point. And it's a decision to Dangevillers to develop in this Grande Galerie you see on the right, and it's a very teeny tobacco box we have just bought last year, which is now in the collection of the Louvre. And you see on this teeny box, you see the only reproduction we have of the Grande Galerie during the Ancien Régime. It was a little ruined because there is a decor on the roof, on the top roof, because it is unfinished, and you see that it is unfinished. It's partly ruined. There are windows on each side of the gallery because the gallery count 10 meters large. Well, it's a very narrow and long corridor. It's a corridor effect, as we say. How do you display the works of art, the Rubens, etc., on this part, just in between windows? It's a very delicate position. And Dangevillers decided to order an architect, Germain Soufflot, which is a very well-known architect at that time, to transform the Grande Galerie into a museum. And of course, we arrived just in 1789, and which is the beginning of the French Revolution. And Dangevillers said, okay, we test a new light on the top roof of the Salon here. In such a manner, we can test the best lighting for the display of paintings, because we know that light coming from the top roof is better for painting into 2 dimensions. And it's this idea, but it's not realized furtherly for the Grande Galerie. But we arrived during the Revolution period with the creation of the museum and the opening in 1793 of the Musée National Museum, and you see the first catalogue of the object of the first museum. He opened really officially in November 1793. And there is several edition printing of this catalogue. It's very impressive, of course, to see that. And the debate at that time is really who is able to direct the museum. And there is a debate between artists and connoisseurs. And you have, of course, it's very interesting to understand that, because I think there is two positions which is today equally on view. You have the position of the artist, and the leader of them is Jacques-Louis David, the great French neoclassicist artist. He has painted, as you know, the house of the Odyssey and several other great machines. But David is very young, it's a genius, and he would like to direct the museum. And he say, okay, the artists are the main able to direct the museum, because the artists need to copy in front of the masterpieces of the royal collections, now becoming national collections. On the other side, you have Jean-Baptiste Pierre Lebrun, the husband of Madame Vigée Lebrun, the great French portraitist. And of course, Lebrun is a connoisseur. He has one of the main important art market gallery in Paris, dedicated to northern schools. And he say, I am a connoisseur, and I would like to develop art history on the Louvre display. It's two positions, because Lebrun is a predecessor of the curator today, and the artist had the position that the museum is really a medium for them to know more and to be trained in their art. Well, we arrived at the beginning of a new area with the Musée Napoléon. And le Musée Napoléon, which is leading by Dominique Vivant-Denon, as Russell has said, of course, because it's the first director of this museum. And the most beautiful museum of the universe, as he has said, of course. It was named by Bonaparte in 1802, and you know the empire is in 1804, and he stayed at the head of the Louvre till the fall of the First Empire in 1815. Dominique Vivant-Denon comes from the court. He was trained in Versailles, and he has diplomatic jobs, we can say, in several courts in Europe, and he knows every collections in Europe. And he has a beautiful collections on its own, on her own. Well, he is at the head of the museum, and he needs to do something to reopen very newly the Grand Gallery. It's in 1802 when he was directed. It's a view of the Grand Gallery just before he has done new work. And you see that there is a windows. We can cancel some windows in such a manner. We have more walls to display the collections. But of course, the effect, the corridor effect is very stupendous, of course, we can say. But during the second wedding of Napoleon I with Marie-Louise of Austria in 1810, you have on your view the new, yes, I think it's really the reconstruction of the Great Gallery under Vivant-Denon, with the architect Pierre-François Fontaine. And you see, and you could notice that the corridor effect is really disturbed. And Fontaine has created some, with columns and pillars, he has created some salons. In such a manner, we have not the long effect of the 420 meters long. And at some point, he has totally refurbished the lighting, because as you can see, we have cancelled windows on the wall in such a manner Denon could display more and more paintings on the wall. And on the other side, we have taste, not only on the salon, but equally in the Grand Gallery, we have taste lighting coming from the roof, the top roof. And it's very important because you see that Napoleon and his wife just go through a museum, not a palace, not only a palace. It's becoming a museum. And you see some very important pastel we have in our collection, in the storage of the drawings department. And of course, you see the salon with a zenithal light, which is transformed into the chapel for the wedding. And just behind the curtains, you have the wedding at Cana, which was displayed, but it's too huge. And we have done curtains to cancel it during just only the ceremony. But on the other side, in the Grande Galerie, I just show you the part displayed for Italian school. There is 500 paintings for the Italian school, most important on display. And I show you, of course, it's some looted collections by Napoleon and Vivant Denon in the Pop collections in Roma, in the Vaticano. You have the Transfiguration by Raffaello, just at the center. You have the Madonna da Foligno by Raffaello equally, because Raphael is one of the most, of course, tasteful artists at that time. And on the other side, because the Great Gallery is on the first side, in the first level of the palace, you have on the ground level the creation of the Museum of the Antiques in 1800. And it's very interesting to see a visit by Napoleon, a visit, a night visit, late opening of the museum for Napoleon. And it's very interesting because you see that there is a gallery dedicated to the perspective on the Laocoon, the great antiques coming from the Vaticano. And on the other side, on the right side, you have the Apollon of the Belvedere, which is, of course, one of the most important masterpieces for Greek antique sculptures. And both came from the Vaticano collections, and they come back, as you know, because you visit today the Vaticano collections and you see all those great masterpieces. But it's the same thing when the French army, leading by the General Bonaparte, entered in Venice, of course. It's in the refectory of San Giorgio Maggiore convent that, of course, the French army would like to size the wedding at Cana. Of course, huge masterpieces would stay. It's, you know, that we have coming back to their genuine places, more than 5,000 pieces, which, of course, in 1815 comes back to their genuine countries. But it's important to notice, of course, the looting policy of Vivant Denon and Napoleon at that time, because if you would like to do the most beautiful museum of the universe, it's really few times, but it exists. It has existed, of course, at some point. And I show you some another example after the great struggle battle in East Germany, in Jena, for instance. Denon, who accompanies the army, the French army, has decided to come back some antiques coming from Berlin. And you know the young girl playing ossicles, of course, which is now coming back in Berlin, of course, in the Antiken Sammlungen. But you see it on these drawings of an exhibition of the lutes coming from Germany. But on the other side, you have very great acquisition done by Denon and Napoleon, because the brother-in-law of Napoleon, the Prince Borghese, who lived in the great Palazzo Borghese in Roma, has a lot of debts, and his brother-in-law, of course, Napoleon, decided to purchase the collections of antiques. And it's very useful for Denon because he could grow and grow more its collection for its new Museum of the Antiques at the Louvre, because Napoleon would like that this museum is very impressive and very important collections. In such a manner, it could rival with collections in Roma, of course. And I show you, maybe we have seen the Diana of Gaby, but you have equally the great well-known sleeping hermaphrodite, of course, coming from the Borghese collection. And as it is a purchase, it is today on view at the Museum of the Louvre. Well, we arrived in the second part, because the second part is dedicated to the development, the huge development and expansion of the museum during the 19th century after the fall of Napoleon I. Because most collections of the most beautiful museum of the universe come back to their genuine countries. It remains the Borghese collection, it remains some very important collections, but we need to transform the museum. And there is a very quick and impressive policy of purchases. And I show you, so as much as I can, the map of the Louvre on the ground floor and first floor in such a manner you can understand the policy of expansion of the museum inside the palace. With the antiques, the King of France acquired the Venus of Milo in 1821. It was, of course, a very well-known masterpiece. But on the other side, the museum acquired, coming from the Revolution loots, of course, coming from an French aristocratic family, the two reliefs we have, very few, but little one, but very important, two reliefs coming from the Parthenon. It's an excavation just before, of course, the story of the British Museum, of course. It's the first excavation done by French diplomacy, and of course, they bring back those two reliefs in Paris, and they have been sized under a revolution period. Then there is a development of a sculptures gallery, because you see the distinction between antiques gallery and sculptures gallery from Middle Ages till modern time with Renaissance, etc. It's a development, a new one, of this gallery in the first part of the 19th century. During the same part, you have, of course, a great expansion of paintings, because there is a great development of French paintings, neoclassicism, Romanticism, the great mood, of course, and training of French academic artists. You know David, which became the prime artist painter of Napoleon I, has given, of course, the great, we say, machine, its great monumental painting with antique model like the Rape of the Sabines, of course, here. But they enter the Louvre, and they are exhibited till today at the Louvre. But during, in 1819, for instance, Theodore Géricault exhibit the raft of Medusa at the Louvre, at the Salon, and the kings of France decide to purchase it. It's the reason why in 1821 it entered the Louvre and has been displayed in the Great Gallery in red here in the Grande Galerie. And you know, the raft of Medusa is really a fait divers, as we say into French, and it's not an official painting. It's really a fact coming from a newspaper story, of course, but it's becoming a genius symbol of romantic drama. It's the same thing for the Liberty Leading the People by Delacroix, of course. There is few time, 10 years, of a Spanish gallery at the Louvre. And it is ordered by Louis Philippe, the King of France, and there is a Spanish museum at the Louvre. And it remains those two paintings today, and very few paintings, because it's the arrival of the French Revolution in 1848, and Louis Philippe fled with its Spanish gallery collections. It's the reason why the Louvre is very poor into Spanish collections. But the National Gallery in London has the Zurbaran San Francesco, very well-known masterpieces. It was exhibited at the Louvre. Or the Young Ladies by Goya, which is at the Lille Musée des Beaux-Arts. They were exhibited at the Louvre 10 years. And we enter the dedication of new civilization which entered the museum. It's very important to notice the great colonial expansion, of course, of Western countries, European countries, Great Britain, England, France, etc. And at that time, just after Egyptian campaign led by Napoleon Bonaparte, Jean-François Champollion, a young professor at the Collège de France, decided to go to Egypt, and he has deciphered the hieroglyph, Egyptian hieroglyph, in 1821. And he is able to transform and to create a chronology of pharaonic time in Egypt. He is really the founder of Egyptology, as we can say. And you know that we have very impressive collections coming from the time of Champollion, the Sphinx of Tanis, or other great reliefs coming from the New Empire. And at the same time, it's Champollion who opened new gallery dedicated to Egyptian collections. And of course, I hope that you can come to the museum and to have a very dedicated visit after the making of the Louvre. And maybe with this gallery, it's really entirely dedicated to that. And we have totally restored this place. It's 9 rooms in the Cour Carrée, as you see on the map, on the south part of the Cour Carrée. It's an enfilade of 9 rooms, and Champollion has displayed their works, Egyptian works of art, in them. And there is ebony showcases coming from architectural design of that time. And we have totally restored that in the genuine decorative arts part. And it's very, of course, impressive. But on the same time we create the Egyptian collection, we have the creation of a maritime museum about the maritime expeditions of French Marine, Ministry of Marine. And you know that the power of the seas during that time is very important. And it's the idea to have, of course, a great development of this policy just extra-European countries, Oceania, Africa, etc. And of course, it's important to bring back to France some specimens, and not only, of course, models, mock-up of maritime expeditions, but equally some Oceanian pieces, as you know, till today, because they are exhibited partly in the Musée du Quai Branly, not anymore at the Louvre, because at the beginning of the 20th century, those collections left the Louvre. It's very important because North African, for instance, because with the colonial occupation of France in Algeria, for instance, in North Africa, there is some very important pieces which were exhibited in this part. But there is also, in the Middle East, of course, just under the Ottoman Empire, some diplomatic survey which were done, and Paul-Émile Botta, for instance, a French diplomat, who decided to pay for excavation in Mesopotamia, in Iraqi, and it's in Mosul, as you know, and maybe he has discovered, imagine he has discovered Nineveh, from Bible, Babylonia, Nineveh, the great cities. No, he has not discovered it. It's a British archaeologist who discovered Nineveh, but he has discovered a king's palace gate with these Assyrian bulls, magnificent and gigantic, and of course he transport them to the Louvre, and it's the opening of Assyrian Museum in 1847 in the Louvre. And you see the development of the occupation of the museum. And we arrive at that time at the mid-19th century. You know that it's the development of industrial revolution, mainly in England, then in France. because Napoleon III, the Second Empire, of course, when he arrived in France in 1850 and he was named emperor in 1852, and he comes back because he was in exile in England. And of course, he would like to imitate the liberal policy of England at that time, and maybe the manufactured development and the Universal Exhibition in London of 1851 in the Crystal Palace was very astonishing for him. You have the development of technique, industrial technique of iron cast. It permits to create glass rooftop, a very continued glass rooftop. It's very impressive, and I show you an image of the Grande Galerie under Napoleon III, because he decided to transform the Grande Galerie with a total glass rooftop. As you know today, it remains still today. But because the technique could permit that, and you see that the architectural design of the Napoleon III New Louvre, le Nouveau Louvre of Napoleon III, is equally the image you have today of the museum with the great courtyard here. And during the Second Empire, it's a great expansion of the collection as well. And as I have noticed for Louis XIV, etc., it's a great expansion during that time, because we have the acquisition of the victory of Samothrace in Asia Minor, in Turkey, actual Turkey, of course. You have the acquisition of great Egyptian collections coming from Saqqara with the seated scribean, you know, which is one of our masterpieces at the Louvre, iconic pieces. And you have equally a new, I can say, Hollywoodian perspective and new display of the Assyrian bulls. And it's a great room dedicated to Mesopotamia at the Louvre. And there is more excavation on the seat, this Mesopotamian, and we had too much more in such a manner. We have 4 bulls, and it's very expensive collections. But one of the most interesting purchase of a collection is the Campana collection. The Prince Campana lived in Roma. He is a very tasteful in Etruscan collections and Greek antiques. And at the same time, he is at the head of the Mount of Pieta, but he has a lot of debt. He was in jail, put in jail, and Napoleon III, who know him by family link, would like to purchase the collections, because the Hermitage in St. Petersburg would like to acquire some part, etc. But Napoleon III said, okay, I acquire the totality of the collections. There is a great Italian primitive Paolo Uccello, because you know that the Battle of San Romano is very well known. You have one exemplar in Florence, Uffizi, one exemplar in the National Gallery in London, and the third one is at the Louvre, but it's coming from the Campana collections. But the main focus about the Campana collection is given by Etruscan collections, great sculptures, and 5,000 Greek vases. And at that time, they have decided to create a gallery. We know today the Gallery Campana, and I invite you, of course, to enjoy the visit of the Gallery Campana when you come back in France, of course, because we have last December totally refurbished and restored this gallery with a new display, very dense, coming from the idea of Napoleon III, industrial series, idea of series. And of course, it's a very important collection, one of the most important. You have St. Petersburg, of course, and you have also Munich. In Germany, we have a great important collections of Greek vase, but the Louvre is one of the most important with Campana. While you see at the end of the Second Empire in 1871 that the museums develop more and more inside the palace, and the map between covered as much as we can with colorful session and rooms. And it's very important. You have the salon just visited by foreigners and tourists during the Second Empire. It's a very beautiful and magnificent palace of the arts. And there is also a great purchase like the Bathsheba by Rembrandt, the Lace Maker by Vermeer, the only Vermeer we can have at the Louvre Museum, the Gilles by Watteau, Jericho, the Derby of Epsom. You see the raft of Medusa, you see the Derby of Epsom, and some very tasteful figures of Middle Ages collections acquired at that time. This precious Virgin of the 13th century Gothic style in ivory, or this cartoon by Leonardo da Vinci, which come from an Italian collection purchased by Napoleon III for the Louvre. Well, we arrived at the end of the Second Empire, and there is the opening of a new era, because it's a turning point with a new governance policy at the head of the French government, the Republic. But there is equally a structural disruption, because it's a burning of the Tuileries Castle, or the Castle of the Tuileries. And as you see with my red cross, of course, it's a new perspective which is opened, which was open, but till today it remains. And of course, you see the garden of the Tuileries in the distance with the Avenue des Champs-Élysées, and it's a total new opening, a new destination of the museum. As much as we can, with the fall of the Second Empire, it's a total development of the museum inside the palace. And it's becoming really the fine arts museum, with the great rooms dedicated to the great masterpieces, David, of course, the Sacre by Napoleon, and equally Gros, Delacroix, Girodet, etc., all the romantic and neoclassic artists. It's a room dedicated to these great masterpieces. But when we enter the 20th century, between two world wars, there is a new turning point, because it's the modernization of the museum. It's very impressionate with, if you compare those two images, you have on one side how it was at the end of the 19th century. There is mosaic decorative parts, these very colorful, like in the Kunsthistorisches Museum in Vienna, on a lot of museums of fine arts during 19th century. But just in 1930, you have the transformation of the same stair into a huge stair dedicated to mass tourism, but we can speak about tourists at that time, but it's visitors. It's a development of visit with late openings schedule. And it's at the same time that we emphasize that citizens could come to the museum as much as they can after they work, after they have worked, after their jobs. And it's a decision to be inspired by a very minimalist vision and modern one at the beginning of the 20th century. And it remains till today, as you know. But it's a new vision of the museum. And it's the same thing in the contents of the museum, because there is a new rivalry between academic art coming from the academic training for the artist. And you see William Bouguereau's Birth of Venus, which is totally, we say in France, art pompier. And on the other side, you have, of course, the avant-garde, the artistic avant-garde, the impressionist, with Édouard Manet, Déjeuner sur l'herbe, lunch on the grass. But I show you in the middle a photo of the display of the Déjeuner sur l'herbe in the Louvre during the 1930s, among Delacroix, Jericho, etc. It's a revolution, but this revolution is only done in 1927. Very lately after the development of the Impressionist movement. And it's very interesting to notice that in between, you have the great purchase by United States of America museums, Metropolitan Museum, Washington, Chicago, etc., were quite a lot Impressionist collections. But in 1927, we can have, for the visitors, you can admire the Olympia of Manet by Manet and the Great Odalisque by Ingres. It's the first time. Well, we have the development of the Second World War with a great rupture equally in the making of the Louvre, of course, because you have the evacuation of the collection in 1939, like the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, the National Gallery in London, etc. We have a very generous master plan to put away from Paris the collections. And at the same time, in 1945, we organize the restitutions. And you have maybe the American troops restituting Leonardo da Vinci in Cracovie in Poland. And maybe I show you, you know, the movie Monuments Men with Cate Blanchett, Matt Damon, and Clooney, of course. And of course, Cate Blanchett shows a play of Rose Valland, who has really developed the policy of restitution because she was a curator during Nazi occupation in Paris, and she knows very well where the collection stood at that time. But we enter the end of the 20th century, and it's a great removal of the collection in Europe, but the movement began in the United States of America because there have no wars inside America's country, as you know, and of course, just we are under the bomb, but at the same time, you have the development after just between and after the Second World War, the development of the great extension of American Museum. Just 1 century after their great opening. In Boston, in the Fine Arts Museum, Yeo Ming Pei has done an extension with new mediums, concrete, glass, inox, etc. New architecture. He has done the same thing in Washington with the East Building. He has created just a side of the National Gallery building, which was opened in 1942. And it's very interesting to see the great development of those museums because you see that it was created to be open to a mass tourist, of course, with new infrastructures like clock room, ticketing spaces, exhibition spaces, bookshops, etc. Well, escalators, mechanical escalators. Well, museums become part of our societies, mainly, firstly, in the United States, then in France, in Europe, because you have the reconstruction in Germany, for instance, and there is a lot of great new museums during the 70s and 80s as well in Germany. But in Paris is a really new redisplay of national collections. And I show you this panoramic view because it's a decision with the birth and the beginning of the Grand Louvre project. It's not only the Grand Louvre, it's a refurbishment of national collections because it's a decision to create the Musée d'Orsay, dedicated to the 19th century. Just here on the left-hand side of the Seine, you have, of course, at the center the Louvre with its collections from antiquity till 19th century, and the great entrance given by Pei at the center of this 19th century architectural palace. And just in the distance, you have the Pompidou Center, opened in 1977, with a totally revolutionary architecture, as you know. But in three tube stations, you can reach all of those museums. And it's in this meaning that you can understand the proximity of those museums and the idea we have at a national level to regroup those collections. And it's, of course, the idea to give to Yeo Ming-pei, the Chinese-American architect, as you know, because he has done Boston and Washington extensions. And our curators at the Louvre know very well their American colleagues who worked in them. And of course, they appreciate those architecture. And it's one part of the way to have decided to give to pay the extension of the Louvre with the creation of the main entrance in the pyramid. But you know that the main entrance is dedicated, it's a conjunction to give to the palace all the museum spaces and to display at the center of it, in this great courtyard, the entrance of the museum. Not to disturb with, to be disturbing with museographic spaces. It's very important because we had the Richelieu wing with 20,000 square meters. And this last administrative building, which remained at the Louvre, left just in another building in 1981 by the decision of François Mitterrand, the president of the Republic at that time. And the Richelieu wing is totally refurbished like a modern museum of the 20th century, with a great courtyard, with a great collections coming from royal gardens, from Louis XIV, for instance, and so more. You have the refurbishment of the Assyrian Bulls courtyard, very expansion of it. On the second floor, you have the top roof lighting given by Yeo Ming-pei for the paintings. And you have the decorative part on the first floor with the decorative art department, with a great cycle of tapestries we can develop in a great gallery. Well, it's a very impressive position in this part of the museum. But if you see on the map, you see that all three wings of the building of the palace, formerly occupied by the palace, is totally devoted today to the museum's occupation. And equally in this part, it's a coming back of the extra-European collections, because at the same time we create in 2000 the Musée du Quai Branly for extra-European collections, we decide to have a collections district in the Louvre to renew the position of those collections among European, of course, and Western taste. It's very important because it's very finely and preciously displayed, as you see. It's Jean-Michel Villemotte, the designer of them. And of course, it's America's sculptures coming from Africa, Oceania, etc. And you have, of course, a very interesting refurbishment. And next year, in 25, Laurence Descartes would like to mirror these collections with some collections coming from our collections at the Louvre. Well, I arrive at my conclusion, of course, to question the universal position of the museum. Today, what does it mean? In 2012, we have opened the Islamic art galleries in the museum, and I invite you as well to visit it. In 2023, we have created a new department, the 9th department, Byzantine and early Christian art. And of course, as you know, we would like to expect to refurbish place and to open new rooms for him in 2027. And it's very impressive because it's Islamic art department and Byzantine department. It's really civilization department. Well, I show you, of course, the idea that the list of our collections department today. It's very impressive, of course, but it's important to understand that it's a way to live more and more. The museum remains living, of course, with this development of its collections just around the museum, but equally outside Paris. In 2012, we have opened the Louvre Lens, a branch museum, a territorial ambition, a poor northern countries, of course, and to bring culture to this poor country with 30% of unemployed people in this district because it's a former mining place. And you see that we have decided to be more, to learn more and to be more ambitious in our didactical purpose. It's a huge gallery with interdisciplinary confrontations of Africa, China, Asia, Western countries, and it's really, we mirror the collections in the same chronology. And it's the same thing in the Louvre Abu Dhabi. We have opened it in 2017. Yes, it's a cultural brand, but not too much, because it's equally the confrontation or the dialogue, maybe we can say more, the dialogue between different civilizations, and maybe in a global vision, of course. Well, last slides, of course. Audience today. We come back to the Louvre. And as you know, in 2023, we have reached 9 million people, just like before the COVID. And of course, what we can do more next step, because pay entrance is becoming too narrow for the tourist, and the importance on European tourist mass tourism. And of course, the idea of Laurence Descartes is to open and to think of a new entrance on this great colonnade facade built under Louis XIV by Colbert in such a manner Louis XIV could remain at the Louvre and not to fled to Versailles. And last one, don't miss to come back to the artists, because they are very important. They are invited. They need to enjoy their stay to copy at the Louvre. And the place of contemporary art is very important because it is a link with you and the museum and its collections. Maybe I show you Braque, of course, in 1952, but we have Anselme Kiefer. You have François Morellet, a French artist, of course, for this glass wall. And you have, of course, Cy Twombly, and I would like to finish with Cy Twombly because it's its last work. He was passed away just after he has done this great ceiling, and in 2010. And its last work, and it's a very interesting work to work with him, of course, to create this ceiling, which was dedicated to Greek and Italian Etruscan collections, because today it's a new display. We have opened this gallery in December, and you can see, of course, on this slide, the last image you could have of Campana Etruscan sculptures here, just under the ceiling by Cy Twombly. Thank you very much for your attention. It's up to you, Russell.
Thank you so much, Françoise, for that brilliant presentation. The images were spectacular, and you very clearly explained how the vast collection of the Louvre first was diminished by the restitution of the artwork seized by Napoleon, and then how it was rebuilt over the next 200 years through one acquisition after another. That was fascinating. And you also showed very helpfully on your brilliant slides there, how the Louvre started at the Grand Gallery, but then spread into the Vieux Cour Carrée, and then finally into the Aile Richelieu after the Ministry of Economy finally left in 1990. So it was a great presentation. Merci beaucoup. Quick question. We have a couple of questions, but okay.
Thank
So
you.
the question is, a question is, where are the curator's offices in the Louvre? You ought to know.
My office, and I am in the former library just behind me on the screen. You have the former library of the curator, and on each side of this library, which is at the mid part of the south wing of the Cour Carrée, in front of the Institute, just along the Seine and the Passerelle des Arts, you have the former beautiful offices. But today we have transformed and displayed the offices in the three wings I have shown to you, of course.
Mhm.
In such a manner, the curator could be in more proximity with their collections.
Okay. And you talked at length about how the Grand Gallery was 420 meters long. How long it isn't 420 meters long anymore? What happened?
No, because some part during after the refurbishment of the glass rooftop under the Second Empire, partly to the Tuileries Castle, there is a great part which fall down, totally ruined and destroyed, and they decide to disrupt the corridor. And today I think it's 280 meters long.
Okay. And is that where now on the other side of that 280 meters, what do we have in that space?
Paintings.
Yeah.
Italian paintings mostly, yes.
And beyond is the École du Louvre, n'est-ce pas?
Yes, the École du Louvre is at the far end in the Pavillon de Flore.
Okay. Last question, because we have to move on, I'm afraid, is how many exhibitions do you have planned at the Louvre for 2024, special temporary exhibitions?
This year, in March, next March, we have Jan van Eyck. You know the primitive Jan van Eyck, because we have a Madonna, very specific, we have restored, and we have an exhibition around it. Very specific, with very important loan from United States and Europe. And then I think we have next autumn, a great exhibition about from Middle Ages till, I can say till today, of course, about the figure of the fool.
Okay. Well, there's always a good reason to go back to the Louvre, and you've given us many, because most of us we're not aware of all of these collections and these new annexes and so on. So thank you so much for introducing us to us. And now I will transfer it to Constance Mardrus.
Yeah, thank you so much, Françoise. It was truly fascinating. Thank you, Russell, for your input as well. Thanks to the Alliance Française Chicago and the Alliance Française Miami Metro for the creation of the series. We really learned a lot. And most importantly, thank you for being with us today. And we will see you next week on Thursday, January 25th at noon Chicago time, 1 p.m. in Miami and 7 p.m. in Paris, to visit the Museum of the Château de Versailles with Russell. Thank you, everyone, and have a good rest of your day. Bye-bye.